Trojans Talk Research is a monthly spotlight on the research interests of Troy's faculty presented by Troy University's Office of Sponsored Programs. This month features Dr. Diane Orlofsky, who will provide a synopsis of 30 years of research into the life and legacy of learning theorist and psychologist Jerome S. Bruner.
So Dr. Orlofsky, I think I've been knowing her since I came to Troy 2007. And Dr. Orlofsky has been teaching here at School of Music since 1986. And then after 36 years, she was granted a professor emerita status in 2022. And now I am so glad she came back and teaching as a part-time faculty and also serve as a graduate music education program coordinator and advisor here at Troy, at the School of Music. And I'd like to brag a lot of achievement from the Dr. Orlofsky, okay? So Dr. Orlofsky is an active clinician, conductor, adjudicator, and researcher, and received the Lacy Power Outstanding Music Educator Award from the Alabama Music Education Association in 2016. She was the recipient of the Wallace D. Malone Distinguished Faculty Award, which recognizes outstanding scholarship, teaching, leadership, and service, as well as the Ingo Award for Excellence in Classroom Teaching, the Phi Kappa Phi Distinguished Scholar Award, the AATE Outstanding Teacher Educator Award, and the Wright State University Music Alumni of the Year Award. Dr. Orlofsky also received an American Fellow Award from the American Association of University Women. She was recently selected to Alabama Music Educator Association Hall of Fame and will be inducted in January 2024 in Huntsville, Alabama. Best known for her research on learning theorist Jerome S. Bruner, the subject of today's talk. She has also written extensively on music teacher education, music education methods, learning theory, piano pedagogy, choral leadership, and interdisciplinary collaboration. Today, Dr. Orlofsky shares an overview of 20-plus years of research into the life of learning theorist Jerome S. Bruner.
Thanks. I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite people and one of the most awe-inspiring research journeys that I think I personally don't know anybody that has come close. It has been an adventure, and it's kind of weird to talk to a group of students and use the word research and exciting in the same sentence. I hope you guys will see by the time that we're done today that research has a sort of a bad connotation, and it's really one of the most wonderful things you can do, to stay active, to stay involved, to stay emergent in the field of music education and just in the field of thinking and why we do what we do. So let's take the journey together, okay? I'll try not to linger too long. So I'm asked this question a lot. You're a music educator. Why did you spend so much time focused on one learning theorist? How does it relate? Well, let's see if we can figure out the through lines. On the left are a few of the areas that I've written about, that I've researched. The underlined ones give you a through line to Jerome Bruner, talking about learning, talking about behavior, talking about instruction and how to sequence it, talking about transfer. Those of you that have had classes with me, we talk a lot about transfer. Talking about attitude, all of these things. So it's really not a very big leap when you see what I've written about in other areas and my focus on Bruner. So how did I get started out into what has really been a lifelong passion? And you can see that Jerome Bruner was born in 1915, and he passed in 2016 at the age of 100. So I have a lot of years to share. I'm going to take you back to 1957. And some of you know why. In 1957, the Russians launched Sputnik. And you say, okay, what did that have to do with education? It had everything to do with education. In the Cold War, it was us versus Russia. And when Russia seemed to get a leg up, a head start, if you will, we began to panic. As we are often in this country, we sort of pulled back. We must not be doing enough math. We're not doing enough science. Therefore, we need to, right? They began to look at curriculum in this country. Sputnik had everything to do with where we are now and to my involvement with him. So 2 years after Sputnik, Jerome Bruner and some of the best thinkers in this country assembled in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, to say, okay, what do we need to do? And we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You know, we need to harness our resources, and that doesn't just include math and science. It also includes the humanities, which for us is a big deal. So when I was in graduate school, master's degree, I had a professor named Martha Wirtz who handed me a copy of Bruner's, basically it was the proceedings from Woods Hole. And he wrote them. And it's a very slim little book, packed with a punch. She said, read this and come back tomorrow and tell me. Well, that's often happens. We're going to read a book in a night and come back and talk about it. My mind was blown when I read The Parcels of Education, and I went back to her and said, why do we constantly find the need to reinvent how to teach? It's here. And it was like written in the late 50s. Why are we 30 years later trying to figure out how to do it? And so that began my journey to find out everything that I could. I read every book I could find, multiple times, every article he had written that I could find. I devoured Bruner. So much so that when I met him for the first time in '95, which I'm going to talk about, we were kind of walking to a subway station, and he looked at me and he said, Diane, you have read more that I've written than I have. And it felt that way to me. It felt that way. I even lingered in the 1960s. Dr. Bruner and others completely developed a national social studies curriculum. And MACOS was a highly controversial but also highly effective way to teach social studies that asked the questions, what is human about human beings? How did they get this way? How can they be made more so? We want children to begin to know and care about the humanity of man. Doesn't seem like a very scary proposition. I became enamored with this whole idea of curriculum reform and how we can do it better. So, after I had finished reading everything I could find, I thought, you know, I'm going to be bold. And here's a little bit of an aside for you. As a researcher, you need to be bold. Sometimes you need to step out and take a risk. So I wrote Dr. Bruner a letter. And it somehow ended up in Ireland, because that's where he was. So his secretary must have just forwarded it. And I have this framed. It's very thin tissue paper. That's what airmail used to look like back then, with his handwritten response to me saying, yes, you have permission to go into my papers at the Harvard University archives. And yes, I will meet with you in New York City. And I thought to myself, here I am, this unknown professor in this tiny little school in South Alabama, and I'm meeting the famed Jerome S. Bruner. To say that I was a little bit overwhelmed is kind of summarized by the fact that I had a tape recorder with me and was so in awe I forgot to turn it on. So when I went back to the hotel, the 3-hour meeting with him, I just wrote down everything I could remember that he said. My second interview, I did not make that mistake. So I did. I went to the archives. It was a very superficial dig. I didn't know how to do archival research back then. Okay, I was just still kind of a fangirl, right? So I pick up something, right? I didn't know what to do with what I was looking at. My interview with him in '95 was in a cafe in New York City, was probably, I don't know, I still kind of pinch myself because he was just taking a chance. He didn't know me, he didn't know my intentions. We're going to talk about intentions when you're dealing with somebody's personal stuff and how ethics plays into that. We corresponded from then through 2 years before he died. We wrote emails and they went well beyond casual. Just sort of, he really took an interest in our family, and we took an interest in what he was doing, and when we were ill or all of that. We sent gifts. We sent pecans from South Alabama, which I guess he shared with diplomats and famous people that he hung with. We were not running in the same crowd by any stretch. And then reading every available resource yielded that book, Redefining Teacher Education, The Theories of Jerome Bruner, and the Practice of Training Teachers. It was an application to what we do here, right? And so you would think, okay, good, be done with it, go do something else. No. What was in the book that led me not to stop? Well, it was this wonderful look at what Jerome Bruner taught me regarding how we learn and how we teach. Things like the difference between analytical thought and intuitive thought. The ideas of how to structure teaching a subject, how to intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. What does it mean to effectively cognitively learn? What does it mean to develop activities in a classroom where you play? Because as we know, for little kids, play is how they learn, right? And freedom from anxiety and drive, how to structure feedback. One of my favorite all-time quotes from Dr. Bruner is, anything can be taught to anyone at any level in a way that is intellectually honest and powerful. And that one I've taken with me, and it's never too far from what I do. So why more Bruner? Well, originally I was just going to update Redefining, the book, right? 15 years later, after it was published, okay, the publisher says it's probably time to revisit and to update. So I asked for permission, extended permission, to go deeper into the archives. And so between the years of 2014 and 2023, with a pause for COVID, which everything was shut down, I would go every summer for a week. That doesn't sound like a lot of time, but it was expensive. So I decided that's what I'm going to do. And so I would be there when the archives opened. I would not eat. I would work clear through until they shut, and then I'd get up the next day and start again. The evenings being just making sure that I had everything, organized for the next day. Once I was about, 3 or 4 years into this process, it became really obvious to me that I was going down the wrong track. The world did not need to hear more from Diane Orlofsky. The world did not need to hear one more expert talking about Jerome Bruner. The world needed to hear what I was seeing buried deep in these papers that lived an hour outside Harvard in some warehouse from Bruner himself. And that's the magic of archival research. The world needed to hear him in his own words. So what does that mean? That means that I had to curate, go through and figure out what is in this collection. And we're talking, guys, we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of boxes. And it's called unprocessed. They kind of know what a box contains. I'll show you pictures, though, that you'll see how daunting this task can be. This is what's in a box. You might open a box. The picture on the right are files of correspondence by alphabetically arranged. So you could pull out a folder, open it up, and it could just be filled with letters from people whose last name starts with A. And then you parcel through to see what is all here. Or maybe above, the top right, back then they typed their lectures. These are bound, typed lectures. The one in the middle, those are all journals. He wrote journals, he kept journals, personal journals. Many, copies perhaps per year, or maybe one that continued all the way through. I'll show you what that handwriting looks like in a minute. And then, or the ones over here, it could be everything. I mean, he would handwrite speeches that he would be off to give at the Sorbonne, and he'd say, I'm not sure if I'm going to deliver this in French or English, but, all there. So you open up a carton and you go, oh, hello, and you start. You start. Just like Julie Andrews would say, you start at the very beginning, right? And you try to get as much done during that time as you can, and then you pick it up the next day. Here's what I found. Letters, journals, lectures, drafts of articles and books that he never published, which was really cool. Grants, newspaper reviews, articles, recorded interviews, books that were translated into many languages, personal family memorabilia. I think the earliest stuff that I found was just from this past summer. I found letters he wrote to his mom and dad from camp when he was 10, and a play he wrote for his brother and his sister to play parts. And that's probably the earliest thing I found. And then sketches. This was in a journal, for example. I'd open it up and there's this very, very old newspaper clipping. You have to wear gloves, right? And they don't let you to bend it back, so you have to put these snakes that are like filled with beans to hold the book open. It's a process. You have to get these soft, cushy pillows to lift it. Okay. So you get the idea. So you open it up and very, very gingerly, carefully, right, so you don't tear or anything. This happened to be a newspaper article about, from 1951, when Bruner delivered deposition for one of the pre-trial dates prior to Brown versus Board. He was an expert witness called by the NAACP to talk about the need to desegregate. And that's some examples. Buried in a journal somewhere, sitting an hour away from Harvard. This is what I found. Kinda, only. This is just some of it. Early 40s, where he was talking and working. He worked for the government, decoding enemy communication. So there was stuff about that. Can you see, as we go through kind of semi-chronologically, how around Sputnik and post-Sputnik. You see where it says 1959 curriculum study? Look and read everything that came after that, and do you see how he did move toward educational topics? In his activist, he didn't want to be an education proponent. He was a psychologist. So he was reluctantly pulled into the reform. All the way through here, his work with Reggio Emilia, which is a wonderful town in Italy that focuses on education for their kids, all the way through spiral curriculum, creativity, learning blocks, learning and thinking, and this is not everything. Okay, just a sample. Typical letter on the left, handwritten letter, and here are some types of correspondence. Howard Gardner, yay, multiple intelligences. Howard Gardner. Robert Oppenheimer, yes, that is the Robert Oppenheimer. There's a great journal entry where he and Robert were on a train together. They were friends, and he was always in awe of Robert. They were at Princeton together, overlapped a little bit. Fascinating stuff. Piaget, those of you know Piaget, Stages of Learning, and then Presidents and Lev Vygotsky. I put that name in there just for you, Ben. But here was a treasure. Looking through journals, and then you come upon one of these sketches. He liked to sketch. It represented what he was seeing, or doing, or feeling, or what he had just experienced. And these were delightful. I don't know what they were or who they were in many cases, but it is typical of Bruner. Bruner said this: if you can't climb on your own shoulders, look at what you just learned or experienced, and represent it to yourself in a different way than you originally had experienced it, you don't know it. And I wonder if maybe sketches were his way of doing that. So 7 years of summer archival digs, the follow-up interview in 2014, original material, 20 plus years of email correspondence. What are some challenges? And I've given you some pictures to talk about the challenges. What are some challenges? What would you think some of the challenges of archival research is? Well, I'll tell you one. The top right, it's a lonely existence. You were sitting at a table, you were allowed a pencil, remember those? And basically some paper, and whatever device you were taking pictures with. Okay? And there you sit, and they bring you boxes, and you're only allowed 10 boxes per day, and you don't know what you're going to get. So they'll bring it out to you on a cart, top left, and there you go. That's your daily work. You just power through. That's what a typical entry in the journal looks like, right there. I became a kind of an expert in his handwriting. Thank God for modern technology that allows you to expand it a little bit so you can see. We have a running joke in my home. Whenever I go and have a question, I'll go to my husband and he'll try it, and my children, and they'll try it until we figure it out, and if not, we just put it in brackets and say, unintelligible. And then, so basically, everything, all of the hard copies of every picture or everything that I took in notebooks, in order, on the left. You also have to be very organized. If you're doing longitudinal studies, you have to kind of use the same system, don't you? And you can't run up to Harvard to say, hey, I forgot page 2 of this journal and this accession number. You either get it or you don't. And then the emails, I printed out every email. Those are his emails to me, not my emails to him. Okay. So the challenge is now is trying to make some semblance of all of that, right? What is that going to look like? And what are you going to use and what are you not going to use? Let's talk a little bit about the ethics of this. These are personal papers. So you are reading a journal and you come upon something that perhaps doesn't need to see the light of day. We'll sell more books, but you have to define the parameters of what you're looking at. And the reason I think Bruner trusted me, because he knew I would never betray that. I'm staying in my lane. I'm staying in the lane of education, of learning, and everything related to that, psychology, and nothing beyond that. So there are things that should never see the light of day in archival research. And I wish more people would approach it that way, but I do think that's why he and his son said, yes, you can. And I think we as young researchers also have to have that same kind of ethical core. This is an example of an email that he wrote me. The context is this. I wrote a column for a journal called The Forum, and this particular column was talking about kids and how they philosophized about making music and who made the first music, and it was told from the point of view of kids, right? This is what we do. And some critic somewhere said, oh, you're demeaning music by talking about it from a kid's point of view. Well, why did you waste time talking about that? And I was complaining to him, basically saying, can you believe people that would actually say this? And this was his response to me. He was a great champion. He and I hit it off in the 90s because he said to me, you know, one of my greatest regrets in life is that I never learned to play the piano. And I said, I wish I lived closer to you, because I would teach you how to play the piano. And he said, oh, I'm too old to learn. I said, Dr. Bruner, you said anything can be taught to anyone at any level in a way that is intellectually powerful and honest. I would teach you how to play the piano. And so he and I hit it. I think he really admired. He would always be wanting to know what we were doing here at Troy. And I would share things with him. In my last meeting with him, he was frail. He was 98. He leaned forward and he said to me, Anna Kate, I'll use you as an example. He leaned forward and he goes, Diane. I said, yes, sir. He goes, dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Why do I like that? Why am I drawn to that? And I said, because music is a language, Dr. Bruner. I said that. I said it has syntax, it has form, it has organization. He goes, Diane, music is not a language. I said, it too is. And there I am, arguing with a 98-year-old Jerome S. Bruner on what it means to be a language. I should have just cut my, right? But he was always wanting to dialogue. He was a wonderful music aficionado. He was a regular at the Chamber Music Society of New York City. He just adored it, always wished he could learn. He said, my heart wanted to play Chopin, and all they gave me was Czerny. If you don't know Czerny, our finger exercises. So there I am, and there we are in 2014. It was a delightful time. I had gone in with these wonderfully crafted questions that was a follow-up from my mid-90s interview with him. And he wanted nothing to do with the pre-scripted questions. And so it's my great delight to have transcribed that interview, because I did remember to turn the tape recorder on at the time. So the book in progress right now is Bruner in his own words, selected materials from the Jerome S. Bruner collection, Harvard University Archives, and I will be editing, basically curating what goes in that book. I'm going to also include some bonus material, some selected emails from because those are my intellectual property. So what are some takeaways for you today? My first takeaway is, that I want you to take away, is exercise curiosity. When you leave here, continue to exercise curiosity, because at the heart of a researcher is a curious mind that absolutely has to know more, know more. Number 2, ask good questions. Dr. Bruner always said, it's more important to ask good questions than it is necessarily to get good answers. Einstein said the same thing. Basically said, ask questions for 59 minutes, try to solve for 1. The idea being that always, always, always stay inquisitive. Ask good questions. If there's no answer, that's okay. And 3, when you teach, when you're out there teaching, conduct action research. And I know some of you are sitting there going, you've got to be kidding. I got to do lesson plans, I got to do program performance, and you're asking me to do action research too? Yes, I am. And it's as simple as identifying a problem, you'll have many in your classroom, devising a plan, you need to act to implement the plan, observe whether or not it's working, and then reflect and share what you found with your colleagues. That's action research. Doesn't necessarily have to see the light of a journal somewhere, but that cycle has to be in place for you guys to be active, current, and ultimately, I think, successful. So I'm going to ask for questions now, since we're done. Any questions or any comments that you have? Yes?
Okay, so whenever you were going through all of the archival stuff,
Yes.
It wasn't necessarily in chronological order. So how did you organize your notes at all? Because that seems really daunting.
Well, first of all, you're not actually taking notes. You have to actually transcribe everything. So, because everything is handwritten, right? Most of it's handwritten or hand-typed, and there are no word processing programs where you can just scan in a handwritten, that look like that, and have it come out, right? So I have spent the better part of that time as well. I would go and get my materials, and then I'd sit there and type, or talk and let it type, and try to get that through. Then I have to go back in and figure out what are some of the key words, right? So when I'm typing, I'm making notes to myself, keywords. Or perhaps he mentions something and I'll go, you know what? The reader's gonna wanna know in a footnote or an endnote what that means. Like, they may not know the significance of why sitting next to Robert Oppenheimer was a big deal, right? You assume they do, but they may not. So you have to do some of that background. Then this summer, what I did was I went through everything and pulled out by accession number, because Harvard has to approve all of this. So I had to give them a list of everything I maybe will use by accession number, meaning the way they catalog, okay? And right now, I'm going through and trying to figure out that organizational process, which will probably not be chronological, will probably be thematic. So everything that necessarily has to do with a particular topic, like the things about early learning and Head Start, those will probably be all in a group together in the book. That is a really great question, Wyatt, because the organization of all of this to make sense for the reader is important. Let me ask you, if you wanted to learn more about Bruner, what way of organization would work for you?
I guess personally, I would like it kind of thematically too, because if I wanted to know like chronologically, I would just go look at his life or like about him, a biography or whatever. But if I'm trying to learn more information, then I would definitely prefer it to be like themes.
Yeah. So then you could also index, and your table of contents would be the way I would want to approach it at this point as well. Good question.
What about the first of Bruner's books that you read drew you to it so much?
It's a great question, Victoria. The fact that in education we are so prone to, let's come up with a new way of teaching something, and then the pendulum will swing, and then we'll be over here. Let's do a new way of teaching what we were just thought was great that we did over here. And this pendulum started giving me whiplash, that we would keep reinventing the wheel, and the wheel didn't need reinventing. Basically, what it needed was understanding how people learn, and then adapting our teaching, right, based on how people learn. And I thought about the simplicity of it, was just, that's where it boils down to. Good learning occurs by good teaching. And packaging it in a program is not necessarily the way to go. And it was at a time when I read it where all of these, well, we won't teach reading this way, we'll teach reading this way. Well, let's not teach writing this way, let's teach writing this way. Or that doesn't work, let's teach new math, and then math is new over here, and it's new. Good teaching is good teaching. So it's a good question.
How did you deal with the mental fatigue of sitting there for all day and doing the same thing?
That's a great question, Hudson. Some days I coped with it better than others. The actual curation where you're at Harvard, which is one of my favorite places on the face of the earth, you'd lose track of time. Literally, there could be there was no conception of what was happening outside the building. I was just that focused. But then the tedious work happens once you go home. And you're sitting there and you're faced with all of those notebooks, and you're sitting there and you're typing everything. And you're thinking, I will never finish. So that's why this summer, when I typed my last word, my last, interpretation of what I was reading, I sent it to a couple friends and I went, it's done. It's not done. Now I have to go back through it. And you have to also understand that I have a lot of articles that probably people don't normally see. He gave me his bibliography that I have to add to, and it's that thick. So it's still tedious. I think what keeps me going through the fatigue and through this is never going to happen is the understanding that original precept, that what I found deserves to be heard. And if I don't do it, who's going to do it, right? It's like this stuff is sitting in a warehouse an hour from Harvard, and it's been closed. It's basically a closed system until 2026. So I also have that date hanging over my head. At 2026, it opens up. And so I have had this really rare opportunity to see it in a way that very few people have. And that keeps me motivated. And my respect for him as well, wanting to contribute to his legacy.
Are you drawn to qualitative research more?
I am. The difference between qualitative and quantitative Anybody? No? Okay. Quantitative, we crunch numbers. Qualitative, we live in the world of ideas and philosophy, and we still look at data, you know, but it's a little bit more based on, let's see, I'm trying to say, descriptive data is more, we're not trying to manipulate something, we're trying to see what exists. So I've always lived in that world. My dissertation was philosophical / historical / descriptive, and one of my profs at FSU said, just get out of her way, she knows what she's doing. And so I was basically charting territory that not too many people, I think, prior had. But that's the world I live in, and that's the world I'm very comfortable in. Anything else?
So when you were going through and compiling and cataloging what you're going to use for the book, do you have a target audience in mind, or what stands out and is book worthy?
That's a really good question, Kev. Well, because I'm confined, because I want to be confined, to keep it at basically anyone interested in education. That seems very broad, right? Or anyone interested in psychology or how people learn. Anyone interested in history, because he is a historical character, right? And knowing more about that. I am writing some personal things. They're not anything horrible, but he took a trip with his kids and in the car. Went from Canada to nearly California. And he wrote basically a travel log. And it tells me a lot about who he was as an individual and the way he perceived the world in his journal. So some of that may or may not be in that, simply because anything that informs our view of him. The idea being that I want this accessible just like he would want this accessible. He said to me once, I don't write much about myself because as soon as you put words on a piece of paper describing you, like in a memoir, it becomes irrelevant because you've already changed. And so this is not meant to be the be-all, end-all of Bruner, because you saw the list, right? You can't even. This is offering snapshots perhaps of the man that we've not seen before, or something that can add to something we already know about things that he's written. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Do you have any ideas or philosophies of his that you don't necessarily agree with that you might bring up in the book, or anything of that realm?
Wow. Probably not, because that's me, right? That's me putting my opinion on. I want his voice to speak. Unadulterated. All I plan to do is set it up so historically perhaps, or to explain who these people are, and to basically put them, to extract from it the topics for organization. I'm going to have to tie my hands because for most of my life I've been talking about Bruner, right? I got to tell you a funny thing. One time a student was writing a paper, was supposed to write a paper about Jerome Bruner, and the teacher knew I was focused on it, so he said, well, go talk to Dr. Orlofsky. So he came in and he sat down and he goes, so tell me what you know about Bruner. And I said, what have you written? What have you read that he's written? And he looked at me blankly, so that showed me that he hadn't read anything. And I said, son, what I want you to do is I want you to go and find the process of education and read it, and then come back to me and we'll talk. He never came back. You have to do the hard work. And so I've done all of that. I sort of talked about that in my first book. This one, I'm going to really try to let him shine, and in ways that perhaps nobody has seen before.
How has his theories and ideas and so forth, has any of that influenced your musicianship? Has it influenced the way you teach? Has it influenced the way you conduct and transmit your musicianship to your students?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Particularly when you're taking a score and you're trying to pull from that score how to then communicate it to the, in my case, singers. How to deconstruct the music and then repackage it and introduce it to whatever students are sitting in front of you. It's taught me a better way of thinking. It's first of all, and then taught me then how hopefully to communicate it better. So it has infiltrated everything that I am. If you cut me, I bleed, that, you know. But it also has made me a better discerner of learning styles in the classroom. Bruner has, he believed in, well, there are more, but there are 4 models of the learner. And one of them is a very lecture-based, and most of it is very collaborative, so that you pull everybody in, right? Everybody is equally important in the learning, teaching paradigm. And we talked about that in our 8 o'clock class this morning. It's making sure to give each of the students that are in your class, everybody has ideas, pulling all of that together and in wrapping it in your pedagogy. Yeah, he definitely has. So it has been my honor to have been entrusted with this, and it's a lot of pressure, but I hope that giving you a little glimpse today has made you even more curious. So go and get the Process of Education, read it, and come back and talk to me about it tomorrow. Thanks.
Trojans Talk Research is a monthly spotlight on the research interests of choice faculty presented by Troy University's Office of Sponsored Programs.